This video is going to be an overview of the plant and animal kingdoms, which we're covering today and tomorrow. There's a lot to be said about plants and animals, and they're really interesting kingdoms. Just giving you a quick overview, it's just not enough time to really delve deeply. So we're just doing a shallow sort of surface coverage. Here's some things we need to know about plants. They are multicellular, unlike most plant-like protists. They are eukaryotes. Their cells contain a nucleus. They perform photosynthesis, and they are green. They have the pigments chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Okay? Sorry. One of the botanists in your book referred to them as stationary animals that eat sunlight. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. And here is an image from your book, and as you can see, this image should look familiar. That is a plant cell, and the green organelles in there are chloroplasts. And again, they contain chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and they perform photosynthesis. One of the interesting things about plants is that all plants need water, but plants have evolved to have reproductive cycles that don't require water. Unlike the sporophytes here in this plant cycle that require water, so ferns and mosses actually require water to transport their spores, seed plants do not. So that's one interesting difference between those types of plants. And if you look at the diversity of plants here on Earth, you can see that flowering plants are predominantly the major plant that lives on Earth. So most of the plants that you see are flowering plants. There are 760 species of the cone-bearing plants, so that would be like the evergreens. They're called gymnosperms, and they also bear seeds, but they are not flowering. And then you have ferns and their relatives, and then of course what we believe to be the most primitive form of plant would be mosses. And what's interesting to note is that when we think of flowers, we think of things that are beautiful and pretty, and of course those are all flowers as well. But things like grass is a flowering plant. So if you let grass grow long enough, you'll see the grass's quote-unquote flower, which produces grass seed. It doesn't necessarily mean that the flower is pretty or aesthetically pleasing to us, but it's just a method of reproduction for the plant. So if plants photosynthesize and create their food that way, then what about the Venus flytrap? Why do we have plants that capture bugs? And in this case, you can see the frog legs sticking out of the Venus flytrap here. Why does that happen? Is the plant actually a heterotroph? The answer is no. The plant does not consume frogs and insects and things like that in order to get energy and metabolize it like a heterotroph, like you and I. What the plant is doing is that it is adapted to growing in very poor nitrogen soil, and it uses traps animals to get those nutrients that is not in the soil. So if you'll recall from our nitrogen cycle, you have nitrogen in the atmosphere that is fixed by nitrogen fixing bacteria, and some of that symbiotically live on different plant roots, and it's fixed in the soil that the plant can then absorb in its roots. And then the plant turns that into proteins, and then decomposers release it back into the atmosphere. So a Venus flytrap can live in soil where there's very little nitrogen and other kinds of nutrients, and it's adapted to use other animals or organisms to get that. All right, so moving on to animals. Animals are multicellular. They're all multicellular. They're eukaryotes. They're heterotrophs. So remember that eukaryotes mean they have a nucleus in their cell. They're heterotrophs, which means they have to metabolize something. They have to consume something in order to have energy. And they have no cell walls. Their cells have no cell walls. The other thing that you should know about animals is that they all move at some point in their life cycle. So you have some animals that when they are at the adult phase of their life cycle, like coral reef or sponges. They're no longer moving, they're stationary, but they have free-swimming larvae. So that's important to know. At some point in their life cycle, all of them have some sort of movement. So moving on to animal diversity, we tend to think of most animals as having a backbone or being a vertebrate, when in actuality, vertebrates make up 4% of animals. So that would be 96% invertebrates. And you can see here from this graph, most of those are actually insects. Okay, so most invertebrates are arthropods. You have things like spiders, mites. Those are non-insect arthropods. And then you have insects, which are also arthropods. That is predominantly the largest number of animals on the earth. I think I read once that there are 6 billion insects for every one human. So they outnumber us by quite a bit. And then when we are talking about vertebrates, or chordates, actually, I should say, we have chordates and we have vertebrates. Among the vertebrates, the predominant number of those are actually what we would call ectotherms. So they do not regulate their own internal temperature. Recall that every single living thing has to maintain a stable internal condition, and that includes temperature. So for you and I, we metabolize food and we convert that into heat, thermal energy, and we regulate our temperature that way. That 25% of chordates do that. Now this is just chordates. Remember, this is like only 4% of the total animals on the planet. 25% of that 4%, if you could keep track, are endothermic like us. So all mammals are endothermic, all birds are endothermic, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the chordates that we see on Earth are actually ectothermic. So they require that the environment remain at a stable internal condition or temperature. Well, that's it for my overview. I hope you learned a little something. There's so much more to be learned about animals and plants, but we're running low on time and just wanted to give you the facts, that especially the things that will be on the final next week. All right, thank you for watching and God bless.